A lot of what pushed the Vietnam War issue to the front pages was that a lot of guys were getting drafted. They didn't want to get drafted. There was something at stake. Same thing with the AIDS. We had people dying right and left, friends, family members, and all that. And so there was a big push. Now that it's tamped down, now that there's an all-volunteer army, there's not quite the anti-war activism. Now that AIDS is controlled, at least in this country, there isn't that kind of activism. Do you hope that this film is some kind of call to action to that, or what's your intent? Where do you want to take this? Why make this movie now, and what's your intent with it?
Well, you're right that the urgency totally changed in '96. Once it became possible to survive, and once most people that these activists knew survived, and these activists themselves survived. Mm-hmm. Suddenly they had the opportunity of pursuing an ordinary life. And how cool is that?
Yeah.
After all of this touch and go, life and death, like nearly annihilation.
That's one of the nice moments of your film, is all of a sudden these guys who, they were trying to make sure they could live the next month, they were living month to month, are now, well, I haven't even thought about living the rest of my life. I'm 40 years old and I've got my whole life ahead of me, and yet I can't even imagine. It hasn't even been on the horizon at this point.
Somebody once said to me that we forgot how to think about how to think of the future. Like, everything had come down so close to the line, and so it made perfect sense that with the urgency down and with the possibility of survival there, that things would change. And unfortunately, I think maybe things got a little too quiet over the last 15 years.
Yeah.
I know that, like the early days, we've stopped talking about AIDS in the media.
Mm-hmm.
As a journalist, which is my day job, I know it's harder and harder to get stories out there about AIDS.
Yeah.
So it's allowed the whole epidemic, the global epidemic, to go unrecognized again. So I don't know. Telling this story, which is telling a story of the potential, what human potential can do, this kind of this grand human thing about what is. Expanding the idea of what is the possible.
Yeah.
That just to look at that and see what they did makes you think it would be possible to attack this next problem, and hopefully people will take up the call.
Do you think that the fight for gay marriage that's happening right now, I mean, literally in this state, North Carolina, just had this big rejection of that possibility. Do you feel that that's like a luxury? In effect, that, I mean, after going back, it's funny because that's the forefront of gay rights in this country right now, is the gay marriage issue.
Right.
You look back at what the devastation, what was happening in the 80s and the 90s. In some ways, it's a triumph. In other ways, it's like, oh my God, the discrepancy seems really strong.
There's nothing. It was a time of radical thought back then, which was interesting, born of desperation and tragedy, but really interesting.
Yeah.
And what you saw in the gay community after *96 was a kind of an embracing of these traditional things, like and representations of them, like that's when the kind of the gay male body beautiful thing took hold. Not only health, but extremely defined health, ripped health, right? So we can do it, but we can really do it, and that, like, now we're going to go to war when everybody else is trying to get out of war.
Yeah.
The gays are like knocking on those doors saying
we're
going to
get in.
Right. Same with marriage.
Yeah.
I mean, you've seen those statistics about heterosexual marriage. Now the majority of children who are born in America today are born to unmarried women.
Yes.
I mean, the whole idea of marriage is so old-fashioned.
Yeah.
And in a way, it's comparable to that period, like after World War II, where America went from being on its toes and engaged in the world to being very domesticated.
Yeah.
Very much about the home and the family and the it's kind of a post-war kind of community idea.
That's interesting.
That's for some, it holds very little allure. But it's also been embraced, which I think is really interesting. The whole gay marriage thing has really been embraced by non-gays. And you look at the work in California, but the lawsuit against Proposition 8 in California. who's spearheaded that? Rob
Reiner.
Rob Reiner.
Yes.
And he brought in a couple of really high-powered, straight community lawyers to come and argue this thing.
Yeah.
It's really exciting to watch, but it's it's a battle that's being waged on behalf of a community
Yeah.
with a lot of buy-in. I mean, I don't want
Yeah.
to allege that it's being done as a renegade operation, but
Yeah.
but it's interesting. It's this whole kind of conservatizing of the community after this, and I guess you could almost predict it. I mean, there were so many people in the gay community who were from that period who died. I mean, it was a decimation. It was more than that. If a decimation means 1 in 10 are gone, then it was way more than that. And what you lost was a generation of men over 50, over 55, they just disappeared. And so you start seeing a new community of people really reinventing instead of building on what was coming before. And there's a little break in tradition there. And, hopefully, I mean, one of the things that was lost was this whole idea of AIDS, the plague years, and AIDS activism. I hear in audiences from people in their 30s who say, I had no idea. I thought it was bad, and the system took care of it.
Yeah.
I thought it just resolved itself.
Yeah. One last question now. Dan Savage and his It Gets Better campaign. Do you see him as sort of carrying on a torch of sorts of ACT UP or TAG, and that he's sort of trying to have this national campaign to kind of, get people more acceptance of gay lifestyle and all of that? Or do you feel like that is it's so divorced from the kind of crises that ACT UP dealt with that it's not even comparable?
Well, I think that campaign is important, and I think it's touched a lot of people, but I also don't think it's true.
Oh, wow.
I don't think things just get better. I think you make them get better.
Yeah.
And I think that's what grassroots activism does. And that's why it's possible for him to say that it does get better, because he looks over his shoulder. If you look back, this is a remarkable period in history, these last 30 years. When AIDS hit, the gay community had no role in civic life. I mean, they didn't exist. They had no elected officials. There were no people on television. You knew no one in public life who was gay. In 30 years, it's gone from that to this, an amazing cultural revolution.
Yeah.
I think faster than any other we've seen in American history. It did get better, but it got better because of the work that the guys in How to Survive a Plague were engaged in on a minute-to-minute basis.
Yeah, that's really interesting if you think of it. The AIDS crisis, as horrible as it was, did galvanize the gay community to become the force that they are now, politically, socially, and everything else.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's how you survive a plague.